it took some time to register it all. But let's move on with Dr. Usman Arshad from Zurich. He is a vet with a PhD in animal molecular biology obtained at the Florida University with Professor Joseph Santos. He has carried out several studies on choline. He's also the writer of a meta-analysis on rumen-protected choline and its benefits. He has attended a postdoc course with Professor Edith Weiss, studying the metabolic function of immune cells and the relationship between immunity and feed efficiency. He is now focusing on projects that integrate nutrition, health, analysis of big data for a more sustainable farming based on scientific evidence. Usman is going to talk about lysine today. He has also carried out a meta-analysis on lysine, so you have the floor.
Okay, so I would like to extend the conversation what Mike has beautifully explained, how the amino acids, they improve the performance in dairy cows. So I will focus more on the lysine, and the idea of this presentation is to get familiar what has been happened so far in the last 35 years. Whatsoever studies have been conducted with lysine, so we decided to choose to do a meta-analysis to see what we have learned so far, how lysine supplementation can improve the performance in dairy cows. Okay, so I think we are pretty much familiar with this concept that lysine and methionine, they are frequently the most limiting amino acids. And also lysine, it has quite contribution in the synthesis of milk protein, which makes it very much critical to balance for the dairy cows. Now, there are several ways to balance lysine in the dairy rations, and because there are some restrictions of using blood meal in European feed market, so rumen-protected lysine offers a great potential to increase the concentration of lysine in the diets of dairy cows. Another aspect of the lysine is that it's pretty susceptible to the heat damage, which reduces its digestibility, which makes the case that if we have supplementation from rumen-protected lysine, that can help us to attain the whatsoever desired levels are needed in the diets of the dairy cows. Now, the concern is that whatsoever studies have been done so far using rumen-protected lysine, only 30% of the studies, they had either 15 or more experimental units per treatment. In other words, every experiment whatsoever has been done so far to see the effect of rumen-protected lysine had only 30% of the time 15 or more than 15 cows. So 70% of the times we had less than 15 cows per experiment. So that makes the point that whenever you see an experiment which makes the case that, we fed the lysine and there was no improvement in productive performance, one reason could be probably there was not enough statistical power to test the effect of lysine. So having no effect of lysine on the production performance doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't work. It could be a possibility that there were not enough number of animals to show the effect from statistical point of view. So one way to handle this uncertainty is we do a meta-analysis. We collect all the data whatsoever has been conducted so far, and then we run the analysis. Also, it's been quite a while that previous meta-analysis was done in 2010. So it's been close to 14 years. So there was a need to update those numbers so that we can guide the dairy producers and the nutritionists in a good way for the balancing of those amino acids. So before we started this meta-analysis, we hypothesized that supplementation of rumen-protected lysine will improve the postpartum performance in dairy cows. And also, using the mixed models approach will help us to allow the identification of what is the optimum concentration of lysine in metabolizable protein to improve the performance in dairy cows. So with these two hypotheses, we had quite some objectives for this big data analysis. So the first objective was, what is the impact if you supplement lysine, which is fed as a rumen-protected lysine, on the performance? The second objective was to identify the optimum concentration of lysine as a part of metabolizable protein in lactating cows. So in the first objective, we just wanted to see, irrespective of the dose or irrespective of the level, what happens if you just feed lysine in a rumen-protected form, and what happens if you don't. And the last objective of this was how this concentration of metabolizable lysine as a percent of metabolizable protein associated with this metabolizable methionine concentration in the diet. Okay, so before you do meta-analysis, you have to develop inclusion criteria, or in other words, eligibility criteria, because if you just put some keywords in the Google, you will come up with thousands of articles, which might not be necessarily done according to your objectives. So you have to develop eligibility criteria. So in our case, it was whatsoever experiments are conducted using randomized controlled, randomized complete block design or complete randomized designs. And in all those experiments, either cow or pen, it is clearly defined as an experimental unit. And whatsoever experiment will become the part of this analysis, within that experiment, we should have a control group where no supplemental rumen-protected lysine is fed, and we should have a treated group where either one or more levels of rumen-protected lysine is fed. And then, depending upon whatsoever is source of the lysine from rumen-protected products, it's variable in terms of the concentration, intestinal digestibility, or in simple words, the several sources of rumen-protected products, they have different bioavailability. So we wanted to standardize the concentration of lysine, so that's why we also fetched that information as well. And lastly, we also collected the ingredient composition of postpartum diets, because several experiments were conducted, some in Europe, some in America, some in other regions of the world. So we wanted to extract the ingredient composition of postpartum diets so that we can fit all those diets into a CNCPS or NASA model, recreate all the ingredient composition, and then run the analysis using a single platform. Okay, so part of the methodology portion, how we did that. So we chose several search engines to find out whatsoever literature has been done. And in order to do that, you have to use some keywords. So in our case, we use lysine dairy cow, lysine transition cow, rumen-protected lysine cow, and rumen-protected lysine transition cow. And whenever the information was not available in the manuscript, we contacted the authors who conducted that experiment to have that information as well. So just let me walk you through the Prisma flow diagram. This just tells the process of collecting data. So when we use those keywords and we entered them in the search engine, so we had close to 7,000 articles. So then, since we used several search engines using the same keywords, so it's possibility that several records were duplicated, so you have to remove those duplicated records. And then we screened close to 2,500 records, and then we have to exclude because those records were not according to our objectives. When we assessed the articles based upon our eligibility criteria, which I explained a couple slides ago, so we came up eventually with 12 articles having 13 experiments. So those 13 experiments were conducted in a way whatsoever was our eligibility criteria. Okay, so finally, we had 12 manuscripts with 13 randomized experiments, and those randomized experiments, they have close to 40 treatment means and over 600 dairy cows. So these were the experiments which were conducted in last 35 years regarding the lysine as a rumen-protected lysine product. So we collected information from those manuscripts as it's listed here, and then also we collected information on the response variables that were according to our objectives. Okay, so I will not go into details. I hope you believe us that we applied the statistical modeling according to the standardized statistical standards, and then what I just wanted to highlight is we analyze the data in two separate ways. The first question we wanted to address, what happens if you add rumen-protected lysine in the diet of the cow, irrespective whatsoever is the dose, whatsoever is the commercial source, doesn't matter. Just we wanted to test how this nutrient improves the performance in dairy cows. And the second question we wanted to address is, what is the optimum concentration of lysine as a percent of metabolizable protein, and how this is associated with the methionine concentration in the diet? So these were the two primarily questions we wanted to answer based upon these statistical modeling. Okay, so just before we go to the results, I just wanted to show you the descriptive statistics of the nutrient intake across two groups. One group was the control, where we had 17 treatments, and those control groups were never fed with rumen-protected lysine. And the other the other group was always had a rumen-protected lysine product. So you can see here both group of cows, they had pretty close to the net energy of lactation, pretty close crude protein, but the real difference was here. So you can see here in the control group there is no lysine, but in the rumen-protected lysine group there was, on an average, there was 20 grams of lysine in the metabolizable protein basis. Okay, so since we reanalyzed all the diets in the NASM, but I just want to highlight this point, acknowledgments to the Dr. Mike Wember group who conducted this analysis. So you can see here, irrespective of the fact if you use NASM or lysine, you have pretty close numbers there for lysine, and you can see here the concordant correlation coefficient, it's over 90, which tells that this predicted supply of the lysine, irrespective of the fact CNCPS or NASM, they're pretty close. So, yeah. Okay, so let's see what happens to the performance of the cows. So this might be an overwhelming chart, but it gives a lot more information. So I wanted to show this to you. So this is the forest plot. Okay, so we say this as a forest plot. And then on the very left side, you can see all those references of the articles which were included in this statistical analysis, okay? And you can see here those experiments started back in 90s all the way to 2023. So then every single row in this forest plot represents a comparison. Basically, one row means that this is a comparison between a control group versus a rumen-protected lysine supplemented group, okay? And then the black central line, which hits close to 0, it means that there was no benefit of intervention. In our case, the intervention was rumen-protected lysine. Then this black dot is the effect size. So effect size means how much increase or decrease was because of that intervention. So if this black dot moves towards the right side of this black line, it means there was an increase in milk yield for that comparison. But if this black dot or the effect size moves to the left side of this black line, it means there was a decrease in milk yield for that particular comparison. Then you can see here the gray box. So the gray box indicates the weight of that comparison in the analysis, because some experiments, like I said, they were conducted using lots of number of cows, and some experiments were conducted with very small number of cows. So experiments where they're conducted with large number of cows, they have small standard errors. So we wanted to standardize those experiments according to their weight. And then there is a dashed maroon line. When this black dot is above this dashed maroon line or is hitting this dashed maroon line, it tells you that there was a positive benefit of supplementing rumen-protected lysine on the performance. Okay, so overall, if you just feed rumen-protected lysine, the overall response is there is 1 kilogram increase in milk yield. That is the overall response across all those comparisons. But we wanted to address a very practical and farmer-oriented question. by doing a subgroup analysis. What is the right time to supplement rumen-protected lysine? So based upon the data available to us, we had the opportunity to split the data in two subgroups. One, when the rumen-protected lysine started in early lactation. And when I say early lactation is either less than 90 days in milk. And the other group of data we had was when the lysine was supplemented beyond 90 days in milk. So you can see here, when the lysine was started supplementation after calving or in early lactation, those cows, they produced 1.5 kilograms more milk. But when the supplementation was started in the mid-lactation, yes, there is still some benefit, but you can see here the magnitude is less. So those cows produce 0.8 liters more milk. So this data suggests that starting supplementation of lysine or balancing amino acids 3 weeks before calving all the way to the early lactation is going to help more cows rather to start late in the mid-lactation. Okay, another question from the producer's perspective is, what is the duration of rumen-protected lysine? How often we should feed it? Should I feed 2 months? Should I feed 6 months during the lactation period? So we wanted to address this question, so we did another subgroup analysis where the focus was on the duration of feeding rumen-protected lysine. So we had two groups of data sets. One, where the rumen-protected lysine was supplemented more than 70 days, or you can say 2.5 months. And the other group of experiments when the rumen-protected lysine was supplemented less than 70 days. So you can see here, when cows were supplemented more days with lysine, they produced more milk. They produced 1.5 kilos more milk. And when they were fed less than 70 days, still they produced more milk, but the magnitude of the response was a bit less. So this tells, if you start balancing amino acids well early in the lactation and you take them all the way to the more than 2.5 months or 3 months after calving, the benefit reflects more in terms of milk production. Now, what happens to the milk component? So I will not go into detail of every milk component, so I just chose to have the protein yield in this case. So you can see here, a lot more time we get this question that should I balance amino acids just for high producing cows, or should I feed or balance amino acids for the low producing cows as well? So you can see here in this subgroup analysis we have this group where cows were producing more than 32 kilos, and this group of the experiments which were conducted in those regions of the world where cows were producing less amount of milk. So you can see here, irrespective of the fact of the level of milk production, the cows who were fed with rumen-protected lysine, they had 40 grams per day more protein if they were producing more than 32, and if they were low producer cows, they were still producing 30 grams more protein on a daily basis. So which tells me that irrespective of the level of milk production, amino acid supplementation is somewhat necessary for the balanced lactation performance. Okay, so the second aspect of this analysis was we wanted to see what is the optimum concentration of metabolizable lysine as a percent of metabolizable protein. So let me explain you how this graph will look like, because there are several graphs on the same theme. So in every single graph on the y-axis, you will see the response variable. For example, in this case is the dry matter intake. On the x-axis, on every graph, you will see the concentration of metabolizable lysine as a percent of metabolizable protein. Okay? And then these triangles, they reflect individual experiments. So each triangle is basically, this is one experiment, this is another experiment, this is another experiment. And then this dashed dotted line, they are connecting the treatment means of that experiment. So for example, in this one, this was the control group, this was the treated group, and they're being connected to each other using this dotted line. Same goes for every single experiment. And then we had the size of the triangle. So you can see here some triangles are small size, some triangles are large size. These are because some experiments were done with small number of cows and some experiments were done with large number of cows. So we wanted to standardize the statistical analysis according to the weight of those experiments in the analysis. So like I mentioned in previous graphs, that benefits of supplementation of lysine on milk yield. So you can see here, interestingly, we did not see an effect of rumen-protected lysine on the dry matter intake. So you can see here the p-value is not significant, which tells that whatsoever an increase was observed in milk yield or milk components, that was independent of the fact that cows did not consume more feed. So without consuming more feed, cows were able to produce more milk and milk components by maintaining the balance or providing additional supplementation of lysine. So what happens to the milk yield? So we observed a linear response. What does it mean? As you increase the concentration of lysine in the diet of the cow, there was a linear increase in the milk yield. So since you can see here, majority of the data sets, they lie somewhere between 7 to 8%. Part of the reason is that starting from early 2000 NRC and late 90s, we have been listening that if you have 7.2 to 7.5% lysine, it should be enough. But you can see here, it is linearly linked. So at least at this point, whatsoever data we have from last 35 years, we can confidently say that at 8% of lysine, like Mike said, according to CNCPS, close to 3.2 grams per megacals, we still see a response. I cannot literally suggest what happens beyond 8% because you can see here we don't have data points here, but certainly if you have close to 8% metabolizable lysine, which is very much equivalent to 3.15 or 3.2 grams in CNCPS, so we get the maximum response. Okay, so for the fat yield, I think Dr. Vandenberg, he pointed out the fact of the lysine, how it helps to improve the milk fat synthesis at the mammary gland and at the physiological and cellular level. This is clearly reflected when you look into the big data analysis. So you can see here, if you are increasing the metabolizable lysine as a concentration of MP, there is a linear increase in the fat yield. And this is not just because those cows produce more milk, those cows also produce more milk fat. Same relationship goes to the milk protein. We observed a linear increase into the protein yield. Okay, so when you adjust those milk yield according to the milk components, rather fat-corrected milk or energy-corrected milk yield, we still observe a linearity in the response variable. Like I said, up till 8% of metabolizable lysine, we get to see a linear benefit. Okay, so the last component of this meta-analysis was to see the feed efficiency. And like Mike pointed out that feed efficiency can be, there are several ways to measure feed efficiency. You can do milk over DMI, you can do fat-corrected milk over DMI, and we can do ECM over DMI, but you can see here, irrespective of the fact what you ever see here, it goes in the same direction. So let me just focus on this figure because this is a slightly bit different in terms of presentation from the rest of the figures. So in this one, you can see here on the y-axis, we have feed efficiency on the scale of energy-corrected milk divided by dry matter intake, okay? And then on the x-axis, we have metabolizable methionine as a percent of metabolizable protein. Remember, we had one of the objectives in our meta-analysis to see how lysine and methionine, they are closely interact to each other. And then each line, depending upon if it's a solid circle or if it's a empty circle or if it's a dashed line or if it's a solid line, there are different levels of metabolizable lysine. So you can see here, as you increase the lysine concentration in the diet, so does the feed efficiency goes up. For example, if you see this dot, which is the 5% metabolizable lysine, so you see the dot is close to 1.2 kilograms efficiency. But if you go to the 8% of lysine in the diet, you can see here the efficiency went up. But now the question is how this is related to the methionine. So you can see here, when you have, let's say, 7.4% of lysine, which is probably this line, somewhere between this and this line here, and then you have less methionine. So in other case, if I just balance my diet with lysine and I forget about methionine, would I get maximum feed efficiency? The answer is no, because you can see here, when you have less methionine, which is close to here, you have less feed efficiency. But if you balance both methionine close to, let's say, 2.5 or 2.4, and then you also have maximum amount of lysine here close to 8%, you get the maximum benefit in terms of feed efficiency. So this makes the point that balancing just one amino acid would not make the point that it can fix everything. You have to balance the whole amino acid profile, specifically focusing on the critical amino acids like lysine, histidine, methionine. Okay, so lastly, I just wanted to highlight this point that we also analyzed the concentrations of different amino acids in that data analysis in the blood, and you can see here, whenever the researchers they feed rumen-protected lysine products, it shows up in the blood, and you can see here there is a real increase in the concentration of lysine in the blood, which suggests that whatsoever source of lysine was being used in the rumen-protected products, they were able to be absorbed at the intestinal level and showed up in the blood, which ultimately transformed into the improved productive performance. Okay, so based upon from the last, I would say 30 to 35 years of research, whatsoever we have done so far, we get to know now that whenever you have metabolizable lysine as a component from rumen-protected lysine, you get to have almost 1.5 kilos more milk, depending upon if you start early in the lactation and if you keep feeding extends in the lactation. And then if you increase lysine from 6.5 to 8.5, which is close to 3.2 grams per megacalorie, so you can get to have 1.8 kilos more milk yield, 2.5 kilos more milk yield if you adjust for fat-corrected milk or energy-corrected milk yield. And then when it gets to the component, we can have close to 70 or 100 grams per day more yield of protein and fat. And the interesting point of this data analysis was that the benefits in terms of the productive performance are irrespective of the fact of the feed intake. So that's why the cows had more, they were more efficient in terms of the performance. So some of the limitations, what we got to know after doing this exercise, this work was published in Journal of Dairy Science. So if you're interested, you can read more there. But we really don't know about the nulliparous response. And we know that every farm represents close to 30 to 35% of transition dairy cows. Because whatsoever research I presented, 90% of that experiments, they were conducted in multiparous cows. So my assumption is that these requirements in nulliparous cows probably would be even higher because those cows are still growing and they have to partition their amino acids for the growth purpose as well. So, but if you ask me, do we have enough data or enough evidence to suggest, probably we still need to do more research in that area. Another aspect of this is we were unable to get the data to see how the rumen-protected lysine affects the health events. Certainly, there are several experiments which suggest that supplementation of rumen-protected lysine, it improves the immune function, and those cows have less risk of having mastitis. Interestingly, in this data set, we had the data of somatic cell score. So when we plotted lysine against the somatic cell score, interestingly, those cows who were fed with rumen-protected lysine, they had less somatic cell score. So this tells me that besides its fat synthesis or improving production performance, it might have some effects on the immune functions. Okay, so from the research point of view, yes, we need several experiments which can go beyond 8% or beyond 3.2 grams, or if you were talking about CNCPS, to see how much benefit we can get even further from balancing amino acids. With that, I would like to thank you, everyone.